Welcome to High Notes, conversations on the art and business of voice. High Notes. Make sure you never miss a video on our channel by pressing that subscribe button, and if you like this episode, please do give it a like and leave us a comment below. Now, let's meet this month's guest. This episode is about creative confidence and finding your voice with Tricia Duffy. Join us as we explore the journey of embracing creativity, overcoming imposter syndrome, and discovering the power of true self-expression. Whether you're a voice actor, business speaker, or simply seeking to reconnect with your creative side, this conversation will inspire you to find your unique voice and take the first step towards a more creative life. Hi, Tricia. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So we'll get straight into it. Before we talk about your work in voice and creativity, I want to know a little bit more about where it all began. Tell us about your early years, your formative years. Is there anything specific about your childhood that you think shapes your current work today?
Oh, in the context of voice, I was always singing as a child. I have very distinct memories of doing things like in the back of the car, my mum and dad would put tapes on and I would do this thing of like squeeching round inside my seatbelt without taking my seatbelt off and facing the back window so that I could sing on the top of my voice, somehow believing that perhaps no one would know that I was doing it if I didn't face people. So basically singing was everything to me. It was a thing that I did the most. But I suppose additionally to that, I was also found in the middle of the night waking up to write poems as well. That was something that I did as a child too. But I didn't have a kind of upbringing that really encouraged me to think of those things as jobs, it's fair to say, because I grew up in a kind of risk-averse environment, not particularly wealthy environment. And so writing your poems and singing, that's something you can do as a hobby. You can't really do that as a career. You've got to prioritise lights on, food on table, something a bit more sensible. That, I guess, it talks to kind of what's happened to me later on in life, which is why these things have come to the fore a little bit later on in my kind of career trajectory than they did when I was very, very young.
Well, I suspect we're going to uncover where that shift happened further on in the questions, but it's always really fascinating to hear about childhood experiences and gives me such a great sense of where we're going to go with this talk. Now, you've had a prolific career as a consultant, a speaker, a podcaster, and a highly accomplished musician. How has your relationship with your own voice evolved across these different roles?
You know, I was thinking about, I've been listening to your podcast and all the different conversations you have and the way that you have of articulating these questions about voice. I just find absolutely fascinating. So congratulations to you for everything that you do. Oh. I think that for me, I spent a lot of time with a voice that was not my own, an inauthentic voice, because the social narratives, as I've just alluded to, that surrounded how I behaved and how my living as well were quite narrow. And I felt a very, very strong urge to kind of comply and fit into lanes that were, you know, relatively risk averse, that kind of put me in some gender categories as well that were quite specific. So I think that my voice has really developed quite a lot in later life, where I've been able to use not only my vocal capacity, if you like, my skill as a singer and also as a speaker, but also what I say has become more authentic and true to me. You know, as I mentioned, as a child, you know, I was always singing, but I sung other people's words. I didn't write my own song. When I wrote poetry, I did perform it because I was one of those speech and drama kids who did all of the Guildhall exams and all the Lambda exams in speech and drama and acting. But once again, you know, generally speaking, other than when I read a poem of my own or something like that, usually I was speaking other people's words. And in my career, then I worked on cruise ships for a few years, which was fantastic. But again, you know, I was telling other people's stories. I was singing other people's songs. And it's only really been later on in life that I've been confident enough to tell my own story and also understand even what my own story is. I took on so many narratives and social kind of constructs that were not true to my authentic self. I believed them to be true for a very long time. So I think that my relationship with my voice has really evolved, and I feel more true to it. And I think my voice has got better as a result, which is extraordinary in the last probably, 5 to 10 years than I ever have prior to that, which is an amazing gift and something that I'm really passionate for everyone else to be able to find as well.
Yeah, well, we feel exactly the same way. It's so funny you pick up on something that essentially is the kind of the heart of being a voice actor, is that we are voicing someone else's words. And of course, we've worked with thousands of individuals, whether it's through our corporate training or whether it's through the voice acting work, to help them understand that if you're just trying to mimic what you've heard someone else do, there is no truth behind bringing someone else's words to life. You have to find yourself within that. But as a voice actor, it's all about the cold read. We have to find that truth in someone else's words in that moment. Often we won't have seen the script before. And that comes down to sort of being a craft and learning the craft. I want to pick up on something in your podcast that we talk about so much here, the idea of perfectionism being exhausting, the idea that we should be naturally gifted at something without any practice, essentially imposter syndrome. What tips or advice would you give creatives who are learning to deal with that in their day-to-day life?
Well, I guess the first thing to note is that everybody suffers from some form of imposter syndrome. I don't believe anyone who says they don't. I just don't buy that that's true. So that in and of itself as a fact is a useful kind of data point, isn't it? To know that we're all suffering from it. I mean, I researched, as you've heard from that episode, imposter syndrome at length, and yet I'm still subject to it myself. So there is an irony there that is just true for everyone in any kind of creative practice, I think. And then the other thing that I think is worth noting is that every single person who ever achieved mastery did it through years and years of practice. There just is no such thing as the natural talent, really. I mean, yes, there's natural inclination. Yes, I recognize that my particular voice is somewhat genetic, and the physiology of it and the kind of the natural part of it is kind of, something that I was born with. But I have a singing lesson every fortnight and I never miss it. I always say that singing long sets, I'm doing a gig on Saturday and I've been asked to do 2 45-minute sets. You can't just turn up and do that if you haven't practiced. I've got a gig on Friday night, a long gig on Saturday and another one on Sunday. There's no way I'd get through Sunday if I didn't work out and train my voice. It's a muscle and it needs training. So yeah, don't be under any illusion that the person that stands up and sings or the piano player that plays or the artist that, creates an incredible work just did that, their first time. It takes years and years of practice and craft. And that's true of every genius that ever lived that's written about. There's just no exception. Mozart, Beethoven, Marie Curie, Henry Ford, all of them worked tirelessly and they compounded their creativity and their thinking in order to become masters.
Yeah, we talk about that again so much. There is something kind of strange about voice where some people think that if you just can open your mouth and speak and read, that you should be able to just suddenly be successful. But this idea that crafting your voice, being able to present, being able to speak, understanding about pauses and vocal tone and all of those other things is as much of a craft as playing an instrument. Now, you, of course, have mastered both.
Well, I don't know that I've mastered quite yet, but I'm on the way.
Yeah, you're on the way.
I still think of myself as an apprentice.
Well, me too. But okay, we've gone a bit of a way along that journey, I would say. So you've said that to be creative is to be human. I wonder what's one small but powerful way someone can start reconnecting with their voice and creative self today, even if they feel a bit out of practice or unsure about where to start?
I guess there are two things out there. As I've alluded to already, there's something about the authenticity of what you say or sing, depending on what your kind of preferred mechanism for using your voice is. So the first way that you might connect is think about what it is that you want to express. And that might be something that you write yourself. I mean, I'm a big fan of Julia Cameron and all her work, and particular morning pages practice is something that I invest a huge amount of time into. Well, every day if I can, I do a little practice of morning pages. Now, obviously, that's not always practical for everyone, given circumstances, perhaps if you have small children, for example. But I find that incredibly rewarding. And sometimes I'm literally ranting on the page about my to-do list. And other times I find that ideas do come to me and I can think of things that I want to say, and it informs my podcast and it informs my songwriting as well. And then the other thing that you could do if you were stepping out into using your voice for the first time is try in a group. So particularly from a singing perspective, there are choirs all over the place, and a lot of them do not require auditions or anything like that. You can just sort of slip in and join in. And that's where you'll hone your craft and you'll practice and you'll learn some techniques and you'll meet some amazing like-minded people. And the communion of singing together is incredibly powerful. And before you know it, you'll be holding the solo. But you've just got to take that first step. And again, like that whole thing about compound creativity, taking one small step. The 10th day or the 10th time that you do it is only possible because you did the first and the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth and the sixth. So start small and give yourself a break, and don't worry if it's not perfect. The joining in and the participation is the most important thing.
Yeah, I guess it's about finding the right fit for you as well, and that can take the time. I'm desperate to find a choir that doesn't exist, by the way, just to let you know. Have you ever seen the film Portrait of a Lady on Fire?
No, I haven't.
Oh, I can't talk about it because I don't want to ruin it for you.
Oh, okay.
But there is something in there, and I keep saying to my husband, I wish there was a choir that was like that. And that's all I'll say for now. When you've watched it, let me know and we'll talk about it again.
Okay, we'll have a little follow-up chat.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, why don't you launch the choir?
Have you ever had moments where your voice felt blocked, creatively or physically? And talk to me about what helped you through those moments.
I think creatively, I have definitely been blocked because for 25 years, I told myself this story that I wasn't a creative person, which is patently untrue. But that was the societal kind of narrative which I adopted. I told myself that I was better supporting other people to be creative, usually men. I sort of put myself in this bridesmaid type role where I was always the wind beneath someone else's wings, allowing them to get the credit, allowing them to achieve their goals. That was when I was working in the television industry. But all the time alongside that, I was facilitating a lot. And so even though I didn't know myself as creative, I did use my voice because facilitating conversations, I'm a trained mediator and I do a lot of group facilitation as well. That was, I guess, in a form of creativity, and it sort of showed itself in its own little safe way. I mean, I would say to myself, I don't need to be creative or have any opinions to do that because all I do is ask questions. But actually asking questions, as you well know, is a form of creativity in and of itself, and something that is, it has to be honed over time and comes with practice. And then in terms of physical blocks, yeah, I've lost my voice a couple of times. The first time when I was working on cruise ships, our schedule was relentless. We would regularly work 16, 18-hour days, and I would be kind of sending a tour off one in the morning, calling bingo, running a quiz, teaching line dancing, singing a set in the evening, etc. And the wear and tear on your voice, I wasn't really doing a lot of vocal training in those days. I was just using it all the time. And I actually developed a vocal node, which was very, very terrifying. I mean, I was one of those very high soprano singers that could sing along with Sarah Brightman. And I suddenly couldn't hit those high notes anymore. They just disappeared completely from my range. And when I came home from working on cruise ships, and I can remember seeing my doctor and him referring me to a speech therapist, actually. And that was really where my relationship with training began in earnest, because then in the shower, I would have these softening exercises to warm up my vocal every day, lots of fricatives and sort of D sounds and that type of thing to warm up. And eventually the no, thank goodness, disappeared. And now I have my full range back again. And then I was also in a musical a few years ago, and the wear and tear of that as well, the daily performance, that took its toll. And I got laryngitis then as well, which was also completely terrifying. But by that stage, I had a singing teacher that I had a good relationship with that was able to help me kind of get back to my form.
I want to pick up on something there, because I think back to when I started working with my voice as a broadcaster and all the various jobs I've done, and not once was looking after your voice ever mentioned. I mean, maybe that was on me, of course, to kind of think about it, but I'm wondering, was that something similar when you were on the cruise ship? Did anyone at your employer or any of your line managers suggest that you looked after your voice? I'll give you an example. When I was doing breakfast for a radio station, I decided, on top of getting up at 4 a.m. in the morning, I would also like to have a lead role in the pantomime. So I emailed the pantomime and said, I really think you should give us a role, thinking it would be a small role. And they ended up giving us the 4th and 5th leads. And for 6 weeks on the trot, got up at 4, did a breakfast show on air till 11 when I left, did a matinee, did an evening performance, went out all night until 2 in the morning and did that for 6 weeks. And I don't even know how my voice lasted. And I'm thinking, isn't it interesting how I didn't even know about voice training at that time in my life. Did you ever experience that as well, where you just muddled your way through?
Oh, gosh, yeah. I mean, when I was in this musical, I was working full time and I went for an open audition with a semi-pro kind of crew, and just to do the audition, because I thought that would be a kind of proof point for me. I was in my 40s and kind of getting back to singing. And I decided, just doing the audition would be a really good thing for me to experience. It would get me used to the rejection. I could see how that feels. And to get a call back was all I expected. So when I went and got the part, I could not believe it. It was absolutely extraordinary. But it was relentless. And I was doing exactly as you describe. I was working all day during the day, in between rehearsals, and then, trying to fit everything around and then going to performances. And what nobody tells you, and I have such incredible admiration for anyone in the musical theatre kind of world, is that the schedule, particularly on those matinee days, is absolutely relentless. There's no opportunity to eat a hot meal, as far as I can tell, at all in the days when you're doing, particularly if you're doing doubles. It's just impossible. And so you just don't take care of yourself. You're relying on junk food, you're flying on adrenaline, you're probably dehydrated, your vocal kind of capacity is reduced, and then you're working it really, really hard on top of that and chatting to everybody in between time as well. So and even in that environment, there was no real discussion about, I steam relentlessly. I have lots of good practice now. I warm up. I look after my voice. I invest in the technicality of it as well. I work with singers now as well, because I'm a songwriter and I work with artists, particularly emerging artists. And I'm always surprised at their lack of kind of vocal preparation as well. And the fact that they don't take singing lessons. And I know there's an affordability point there, which is just true of all musicians, because it's not a get rich quick scheme. But, the lack of investment in the health of I hope I can still sing the way I can now when I'm in my 80s. And there is no reason why I shouldn't be able to, if I look after my voice. And it's really just my choice.
It's consistency, isn't it? It's little and often every day, rather than, doing a whole set of exercises once a week, and we talk about that so much here. It's how can you bake it into your everyday life? We often say, try doing a couple of things in the shower. And you mentioned that yourself at the start of our discussion. And I think the responsibility is on us and the employers. But I do recall, I can't absolve myself from that. Maybe I should have thought, working with my voice a lot, maybe I'll get coaching. But I honestly did not even think about it. It didn't even cross my mind, because I was of that opinion, well, I should know what I'm doing. I was lucky to get this break. I was the only female. I was the sidekick, all the usual stories. And now that I'm older and hopefully wiser, although just a tad, when we're working with younger talent, I say you have the responsibility to make sure you keep your vocal instrument in check and in tune.
I think the thing is, though, you say employers, but who are the employers? There are no employers in the gig economy.
No, I know.
And in music and in your line of work and even in podcasting, there's no employer. There's no one here. There's no HR department with kind of, a memo coming out every month saying, just to remind you about your vocal hygiene. That just doesn't happen. And then the other thing that really astonishes me is the lack of information. So I meet other singers who say, oh, why are you drinking cold water? And I say, well, why does that make a difference? And it goes down a different tube. I mean, I'm sorry. It's not rushing over my vocal cords. Just some basic physiology, I just think is astonishing as well. I find it quite funny how misinformed we all are about our voices.
Well, don't forget, a lot of us are getting our information from 30-second clips off TikTok and YouTube and, social media. And even I sometimes think I can't be bothered to read long form. I'll just scroll. I mean, I'm much better at not doing that. But there's this sort of belief that all the valuable information out there is free and can be accessed in very short form sound bites. And actually, if you find the right coach or the right support network, you can kind of block out a lot of the noise and get some really experienced advice, I guess. I really want you to talk to us about your podcast, which is brimming with creativity and also talks about the idea of long-term planning. Tell us what your podcast is all about.
So the podcast is called In 10 Years' Time, How to Live a Creative Life. And the philosophy behind it is that if you do your own personal 10-year plan, that will help you set a North Star and a guide for what you would like your future to be like. And then all you need to do is every day, one tiny thing towards making that true. That's the philosophy in a nutshell. And it came about because I had an epiphany around the time I turned 50, where I suddenly went, do you know what? I just don't want to be working as a management consultant. I want to be living a creative life, particularly as a songwriter. And so I started using this tool, this 10-year planning tool myself, which I'd used with businesses, creative businesses and media businesses in particular, for a very long time and seen how successful it was. And I just sort of had this hypothesis, what would happen if I applied this process to myself? And so I did that. I mean, for a good couple of years, I just did that as a little solo exercise without really telling anyone about it. It was just something I did quietly in the background. And then I wrote an article which went on LinkedIn called In 10 Years' Time, which talked about how I was using this process. And so many people got in touch with me that made me think maybe there was something in it. But it took me a good 18 months from that kind of moment to actually launching the podcast. And it's a research-based podcast, and there's a whole bunch of resources, and I run workshops as well to go alongside that, to try and encourage everybody, regardless of what stage, age, or kind of career trajectory they may be on, to embrace their creativity for their own health and well-being, and also to encourage them to kind of dream about what might be possible in 10 years' time, regardless of how old they are.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. But I've listened to some of it, not all of it, and it's a wonderful podcast. Clearly, there's a lot of passion behind it. I love the research behind it as well. And it's kind of, digs deeper into so many of the sound bites that you do hear a lot of. The well-being is a huge industry now. And I think to hear the research that goes on behind the scenes is a really important part of that podcast. And there's some, great reading materials on there. And, I saw the John Locke article, and I just suddenly thought, God, I'd really like to take 3 months off and read all this stuff rather than having to work. But, really
that's the intention, is that I do all the reading and I pour through all of the medical journals and the psychological journals and all the rest of it and distill it down so that you don't have to. That's the kind of the offer. My act of generosity, if you like, to others is I'll distill it into a 25-minute or 20 to 25-minute podcast so that it's easy to access. And I love the research. So, it's not entirely selfless.
Yeah. So you're a human version of Blinkist then, I'm guessing. You're just summarising it for us. You talk a lot about this 10-year vision, but how does looking that far ahead help unlock more creativity and freedom in the present?
So if you decide, as I have, in 10 years' time, I would like to be living from my means as a podcaster and a songwriter, then each day when I'm busy with my day job and my kids and all of the other things that I've got to do before picking up my guitar and writing a lyric, it's very, very easy just to discount that. But actually what I can say to myself is, do you know what, future me would really appreciate it if I just wrote 4 lines. And that really does only take 10, 15 minutes. They might not be any good. They may be terrible. But as we've already articulated, mastery comes from practice. And so just having that practice, picking up my guitar for 5 minutes to practice on something that's a difficult corner that I'm finding it hard to get my fingers around is a compounding activity, which will, inevitably contribute to my future as a hopefully master guitar player. But if I don't do it, then, another day goes by. But because it's like a mega pre-deciding tool, if you like. I've already decided that's the trajectory and the direction of travel. All I need to do is execute it. And I guess it's worth pointing out that the 10-year plan does change and evolve. I mean, I update mine about 3 times a year. So that seems quite frequent, doesn't it? But what astonishes me when I do that is not only the things that change, because obviously as I encounter more wonderful people, I get my head turned in lots of different directions, particularly related to my creative self. And I learn more because of my research. But also the things that stay the same, it really tells me that is something that I really want. And I think that there is a tendency as we go through midlife to stop asking ourselves what it is we really want from life. It's very, very easy, as I've said already, to kind of fall in with these kind of rails and guidelines and kind of stories that have been written for us by a very prescriptive society, and actually just taking 90 minutes to sit down and think, what would I really like? And what would I like that future to be? And what do I want 10 years time me to look back on in this decade and be proud of and have as my legacy? It allows you the opportunity to determine what makes you tick, which is what makes you happier in the moment when you spend that 5 minutes practicing your guitar, and suddenly the thing that you've been struggling with falls into place.
We do very similar sort of deep work when we're working with clients. And I find I say this all the time, in the UK, we're such cynical, judgmental consumers, and no more so than to ourselves. And I find it fascinating that a lot of the time it's almost about giving someone permission to just spend that 90 minutes looking at themselves and getting rid of all the admin tasks and all the stuff that we feel we need to tick off and saying, what is it I really want? And I think sometimes you do need help to do that. You do need another perspective of saying it's absolutely fine to put yourself forward for things. Why not me? That's what I always say. When you say no one suffers from imposter syndrome, I can't say I have never suffered from it, but I am at a point in my life where I can recognize it and say, I don't think so. I recognize that thought. I'm just going to put you to one side. I'm just going to crack on and do what the hell I want, which is a really nice way to live.
I love that. And actually, I have a similar process myself. I call my inner critic Sebastian.
I heard on your podcast.
So I say, thank you, Sebastian. You're not welcome here. You can go away. And just naming it and calling it out actually helps you, because we're not immune from it, but we can deal with it when we understand that's what it is.
Yeah.
Whereas if we just allow ourselves to be flooded with, I don't belong here, I'm not deserving, etc., then that can become a dominant voice, which will stop us in our tracks.
Yeah, and that most importantly, remembering that we are not our thoughts. Obviously, I'm not going to go down a huge meditation route now, but when you have learned any form of meditation, you recognize that these thoughts can take us over. You know, we have legs and arms and guts and an autonomic nervous system and feet and all these things that are not just thoughts. And yet we spend so much time up here. So yeah, it's kind of great to pull it all apart whilst we're chatting. So let's move on to another question. You've applied method acting to songwriting, which I'm really interested in. What can voice actors or narrators learn from that same approach, especially when connecting with character or emotion?
Well, I mean, the project was a really big, involved project. It took me about 6 months, and I wanted to understand whether or not using acting techniques such as the method and Stanislavski's system would allow me to write character songs in a more authentic way. So by using my own emotional experience, my own active memory, as well as engaging with my senses, would it allow me, when I'm writing from someone else's perspective, to do that in a more authentic way? Because there is a big problem in songwriting, particularly in commercial songwriting, which is that the majority of songs are written by a very small demographic of people. They are white, male, heteronormative, ableist, Euro-American standards that give the voice to pretty much almost every song that you hear that's commercially successful. 85% are written by this small type of person. So with that in mind, and the responsibility that we have when we kind of write in someone else's voice, what can we learn from our own experiences that applies range of emotions and feelings and thoughts and everything that we've ever known and experienced to make those characters just more believable, more likely, more representative, etc. I ended up writing an entire album from the perspective of one character from one play. It's Serafina from the Rose Tattoo by Tennessee Williams. It's been such a long project, but I had to ask the Tennessee Williams Foundation for permission to release the work, which I now have the license for that. So now I can go ahead and finish the record. And I pretty much spent, about 6 months in character. Now that's a long drawn out process, which I did for a specific reason, which obviously you can't do as a voice actor if you're just turning up and being given a script. But certainly honing my ability to do that, practice makes perfect. I mean, the first time I stepped into a method acting class, because as a child actor, you don't really use method because of the use of emotional memory. Hopefully you've never had too many traumatic experiences as a youngster. I'd never really come across it in a really meaningful way when I was acting as a child. But actually just honing that experience to be able to grasp some of those memories quickly and have them at my disposal sort of within easy reach, if you like, without having to kind of go through hours of, meditative and sense memory practice, etc., to grasp them is a real asset. I mean, I have a long way to go because I'm not an actor. I don't do that all the time, but it's something that I'm continuing my practice with so that I can just get hold of how that situation might have felt and relate something from my own experience to someone else's circumstances, so that when I am writing and thinking about how I even might sing someone else's song, even I can do it from a perspective of my own vulnerability, my own kind of pain, love, joy, all the things that I've ever felt.
I think that work is so important. And for those listeners that work in the corporate world, we often start working together and they say, look, I'm not interested in acting or anything like that. And we sort of explain, but you assume different characters all the time in your day-to-day life, answering the door 15 times to the postman and dealing with your children and schools and teachers, and then in the boardroom and then reception, and it's that idea that everyone deserves to explore character work for themselves. It's not just compartmentalized to actors and singers, and that we are all creative and we can all turn elements of those characteristics on and off. Is that something that resonates with you, with your clients?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that the interesting thing that you have to be in the right frame of mind to do any kind of work, don't you? I was thinking the other day about how I did an in-person workshop, in 10 years' time workshop at a yoga studio near here a couple of weeks ago. And, everyone came into the room and it was a beautiful environment and everyone was in the right kind of frame of mind. But as I stood there at the top of the room and I just invited everybody to close their eyes and invite all of the parts of their own identities to join us in the room, and I was sort of calling out the part of you that likes to walk in nature, etc. Suddenly, Sebastian says, who do you think you are to be asking them to do that, to hold the room like this? And I was like, it's fine. I can do this because this is my expertise. I've researched this. I know this is what I need to do. And yet I don't have too much of a problem doing that within my work life, where I would facilitate a big workshop with a corporate client and say, right, this is what we're going to do now. We're going to take us through a scenario of how we're going to improve the efficiency and whatever it might be. Because that's a character that I wear all the time and I put on the right clothes and I feel, very comfortable. Likewise, I do my in 10 years' time workshops online. It feels a little bit more comfortable because I've got the slides to hide behind and there they are. But then here I was in this room with all these beautiful people lying on the floor and leaning on their bolsters on their yoga mats and taking them through this process. But it was incredibly effective once I'd got Sebastian to shuffle off out the window. And yeah, you take on the persona that's expected in the room and then you get a better result as a reward for that, don't you?
Yeah, and it's reading the room as well and repetition. Obviously you've worked in that business space numerous times, you've worked in the online space numerous times, and maybe that particular yoga class you've done slightly fewer times, and so that was dealing with your own confidence. And I think, everybody I work with, it doesn't matter who, all the way through to CEOs, philanthropists, wherever in the world, we all suffer from the same afflictions. We tend to look at someone else and say, well, they were born like it. They're obviously great orators, or they're great in the boardroom, or, they lead a business. They don't suffer from imposter syndrome. Categorically, that is not the case. And I think it's just working with people on that human level to realize that we're all going through the same thing, as if we're all just a little bit more honest with the right set of people, and I think there is something about social, of course, where there is a lot of sharing of a lot of stuff, that I still stick by the adage that if I'm going to have a deep and meaningful conversation with you, it's going to at least be live. It's going to be where we can have an exchange of value rather than me promoting my thoughts to an empty, vacuous online platform. That's just my opinion. Not to say it's the right one, but I think those exchanges in real life is something that BRAVA has really, really got behind. That's part of our brand. That's part of our proposition, and we will never change that because it's so powerful. Is that something that's meaningful to you as well?
I mean, certainly. I did an entire series, as you probably know, on creative communion and how bringing people together, both online and in real life spaces, in-person spaces, is so powerful. I invest a lot of thinking about things that are beyond what I can see and feel and touch and hear. And, the sort of, the universe will guide me. But I really do lean into that. And I believe into that kind of sort of spiritual side of myself as well. I believe I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. I believe I'm listening to the person I'm supposed to be listening to. I step through doors as they open to me, and I encounter people and believe in them and their creativity with no evidence required, because I know they are. I have an inner knowing that everybody is creative and everyone has this great potential. And so actually just even pre-deciding that as a kind of philosophy, for want of a better word, is extremely powerful, because it means every single person who comes to me with their imposter syndrome or demonstrates their nervousness, I know categorically that they're capable of it. 100%. There's just no doubt in my mind. It's a given. It's an absolute given. So that's quite a powerful kind of premise to start any conversation on, isn't it?
Yeah, and also the energy you give off that isn't vocal, right? I mean, I get lots of people will say to me, how come, things always happen for you? You always meet people on trains or buses or planes or crazy stuff happens. And it sounds to me like you're very similar in the sense that you're very open to possibility. My husband will say, well, you're the sort of person that always says yes to everything. And I'm the sort of person that will say, no, thank you. And I think that sounds very similar to what you're describing. So having that openness and being open to what the universe does throw at us, I think is really, really important.
There's something about curiosity, isn't there? And I think it goes with creativity, doesn't it? I've not met very many actors that weren't curious people. I've not met a single songwriter that wasn't a curious person. It's one of these things that kind of brings us together and galvanizes us as creatives, is that what's the writer or the songwriter who hears the couple arguing and says, would you mind speaking up a little bit? There's this sort of innate curiosity in human interaction, in other people's stories, in other people's perspectives. It's fascinating, and it kind of is what brings us together and connects people together and kind of makes them form friendships and relationships and communion, isn't it?
Yeah, and maybe that's why there's such a sense of loneliness where perhaps some of us have lost that sense of curiosity. And, I'm always learning, and reading books is, my most luxurious thing I can do under the electric blanket. It's just number one up there. But actually, every single client we work with has the most fascinating story. And a lot of individuals don't think their stories are interesting. And being able to sit with someone and slowly, week by week, let that story unfold in their own time, and enabling or supporting them to realize that their story matters, their voice matters, all of these things that we hear online. But the act of actually going through that process, I think, is really, really powerful. And I think you're right. Curiosity is the key driver for us here at BRAVA. So we've come nearly to the end of our chat. One final question for you, which it had to be this. Looking ahead, what is your own vision for the next chapter or 10 years of your life?
As I said, I would love to be living from this creative life, which I can't do right now. I still work in my day job, in my muggle job, I heard someone describe it as recently. So, it will be a glorious day, the day that I can switch that off and dedicate all of my time to my creativity and my research. I have an aspiration to do a PhD, which looks at the relationship between Stanislavski's work and songwriting specifically. So I'm hoping that will happen as well. So it's really just about continuing this kind of conversation, growing the In 10 Years Time brand so that it can reach more people, and hopefully being in a position where I can make my living from the combination of that and my songwriting would be my absolute dream, alongside holding on to my current levels of fitness and my voice and all of those things that take that daily practice, which I invest in every day.
Well, Tricia, having spoken to you today, I have no doubt that in 10 years' time you will reach that goal. So thank you so much for your time and being so gracious with your experience. And we will keep following you. Please check out Tricia's podcast. It's really, really brilliant listen. And hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure and joy to meet you as well.
You've been listening to High Notes, a podcast on the art and business of voice. Thanks for joining us on this episode of High Notes. Check out the episode description below for more information. And to find out more about our work at BRAVA and get info and tips, subscribe to our newsletter. The link is also below. Join us next time for more insights into the world of voice.